Small ranks of foreign companies left Russia in droves after Western countries decided to impose sanctions on the country led by President Vladimir Putin. But the restrictions imposed shortly after the launch of Russia's special military operation in Ukraine backfired on those who introduced them, Putin said. Quoted from the Sputnik news page, Monday, foreign retail companies that withdrew from Russia or suspended their operations amid Russia's special military operations in Ukraine have lost about $2 billion in profits. Russian business newspapers quoted unnamed sources as saying that the biggest losses suffered by foreign companies, including furniture giant IKEA and Swedish clothing brand H&M, lost around $400 million and $363 million respectively. Meanwhile, Spanish clothing company Inditex, which owns brands such as Zara, Bershka and Massimo Dutti, suffered a loss of around $300 million. French sportswear retailer Decathlon lost at least $140 million. Meanwhile, Italian luxury retailer Moncler and French luxury brand Hermes together lost about $200 million. Among those brands that remain closed in Russia but have not finalized their intention to leave the country, there are net losses estimated at $500 to $700 million. Japanese clothing maker Uniqlo is likely to be the hardest hit in terms of revenue, given the company's steadily growing revenue from sales in Russia in 2019 and 2021. The news comes after President Vladimir Putin said companies leaving Russia left a good legacy, as he vowed not to let their assets and infrastructure go to waste. Our companies and our entrepreneurs took these companies and businesses and continued this work. And this process is going on quite successfully, Putin stressed. In early January, a poll revealed that more than 50% of Russians were not affected by the exodus of global fashion brands from the country in 2022. At least 56% of respondents said they were barely aware of the departure of foreign clothing brands, including Chanel, Louis Vuitton, Zara and H&M. According to the survey, Russian consumers interviewed said that neither their preferences nor their wallets were affected by the company's recall. Many foreign companies leaving the Russian market were preceded by the introduction of severe sanctions by the West against Russia due to special military operations in Ukraine. While acknowledging the negative effect of sanctions on the Russian economy, Putin underlined that these restrictive measures will also backfire on everyone who implements them. Emmanuel Macron. Reflecting on the Russia-Ukraine war, Europe don't follow the US in the China-Taiwan conflict, French President Emmanuel Macron reminded his European partners not to be dragged into a confrontation on behalf of the United States, US, in the conflict between China and Taiwan. According to him, Europe must pursue a strategic economy and avoid getting involved in conflicts that are not in their interests. President Emmanuel Macron, who recently visited China, gave his opinion to Politico. Europe is at great risk of being caught up in a crisis that is not ours, he said Sunday. The French president then explained it simply, as quoted from France 24. The paradox is that, in times of panic, we believed we were just followers of America, President Emmanuel Macron said. He then began to discuss the conflict between China and Taiwan, as well as US involvement. The question that Europeans need to answer is what is in our interest to accelerate the crisis in Taiwan, he said. No, the worst thing is to think that we Europeans should become US followers and adjust to the US rhythm in Taiwan and China's overreaction, he added. Reflecting on the war in Ukraine, President Emmanuel Macron then compared the European war to the crisis in Ukraine, which has not been resolved to this day. If Europeans can't solve the crisis in Ukraine, how can we credibly say on the Taiwan, be careful, if you make a mistake, we will be there, he said, quoted from RT. Citing his ideals of EU strategic autonomy, Emmanuel Macron stressed the need for a firm European position. We have to be clear where our views overlap with the US, but whether it's about Ukraine, relations with China or sanctions, we have a European strategy, he said. We don't want to get into bloc versus bloc logic, he added. Europe must not be caught up in world chaos and a crisis that is not ours, he continued. China and Taiwan conflict. The conflict between China and Taiwan has caused China-US relations to be at their lowest point in history. This right is due to US President Joe Biden declaring the US will intervene militarily to prevent a Chinese invasion to unify the government of Taiwan under China. Meanwhile, the leaders of major countries in the world, including Emmanuel Macron, have tried to avoid confrontation with China and also not take the US side in the Taiwan conflict. Knowing China's closeness to Russia, world leaders urged China to condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. However, the insistence angered Chinese President Xi Jinping, according to Chinese media reports. China's criticism of this push came from the chairperson of the European Union (EU) Commission on China, Ursula von der Leyen, who said the determining factor for EU-China relations going forward would be the relationship between China and Russia. China insists on remaining neutral on Russia and Ukraine issues. France wants to reduce dependence on the US. French President Emmanuel Macron and former German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, have spoken of reducing dependence on the US in recent years. Europe should better fund its defense industry, develop nuclear and renewable energy. They also called for reducing dependence on the US dollar to limit its dependence on the United States. After Russia launched its invasion of Ukraine, the US pushed its NATO partners to arm Ukraine. Germany and France have supplied Ukraine with armor and ammunition. In fact, Germany has been supplying tanks and training the Ukrainian army.